You paint a very vivid picture with this article, and I think the only place that we can start is kind of the big picture, which is the question, is Silicon Valley just too homogenous, too white at this point? What do you think?
Yes,
There we go.
is the easy answer.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's too white was a snappy line in the story. One could say it's too white and Asian in that
Sure.
Both white people and Asians are overrepresented in Silicon Valley.
I think we hear a lot about companies who are kind of stepping up their efforts to kind of explore candidates from all walks of life, all over the world. Yet they're having a hard time kind of following through on the hiring aspect. Why is there such a disconnect there?
So, if we had talked a couple of years ago, I could have easily told you, you know what, they're just not trying that hard. Companies say they want to do this, but they're not doing it. Now it's more complicated than that. I mean, as you know, over the past couple of years, companies have poured like hundreds of millions of dollars into trying to make their ranks more diverse. To their credit, they are making an effort, and there is a problem, a sort of structural problem that they're facing, which is that it's true that people from underrepresented backgrounds tend to come into college with less experience in programming than their white and Asian or Asian American counterparts. And the colleges that they're disproportionately attending aren't teaching the skills that they need to know in the way that like a Stanford or an MIT or is teaching these skills. And so what these companies are learning, a couple of years ago, they went into these places, into historically Black colleges in particular, and tried to hire graduating seniors. And what they found is that from their perspective, these seniors just didn't have the skills and experience they needed. So what they're doing now is they're offering internships and other programs to freshmen and sophomores, but it's going to be another like 3 or 4 or 5 years before these programs result in kids who are graduating from college with the skills and experience necessary to get jobs. So that's the company's perspective. If you ask the students and the colleges that are educating them and their professors and people of color in the industry, they will also point out that there is very much still a cultural problem in Silicon Valley where it's so white and so Asian and so just culturally homogenous that people from other backgrounds and the African-American students in particular who I talk to just don't feel like there's a place for them there often.
Yeah, that was definitely a point that I found interesting, is that there's this kind of the environment right now, and the sheer geography of everything and the kind of the historical hiring practices for years, is that people from those underrepresented represented backgrounds kind of don't fit in because so many of the people that are already there have been doing this for so long. Like, they started coding at 6 or 7 years old, and so
right.
It's just kind of ingrained in their culture because they've been in the area for as long as they have. And I don't know, that was interesting.
Vauhini, something that you said really resonated with me, and that is that you have a lot of these companies saying, well, there's a class now that are sophomores, and they'll be coming up. So in the next 3 to 4 years, we'll start to see diversity in the workplace. But that's what I heard when I was an undergraduate for years ago, and it hasn't changed. In fact, that seems to be the tale every single time we talk about diversity, which is, oh, well, the next crop is coming in. The next generation is just about ready to enter the workplace, and then it doesn't change, which means that either we're lying about the numbers that are in undergraduates coming through the workforce, or that's just where they choose not to go into. There's people who finish their studies and they decide they're going to go into a different field. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I mean, there are a couple of different perspectives on this. One thing I will say is that it's factually true that over the past year or two, companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Intel, and Pinterest, to name a couple that come to mind, have really seriously invested in this in a way that they hadn't done in the past. And so there is a new investment that wasn't present when you were in college or when I was in college years ago. And, but that said, I don't know that I would be that surprised if 4 or 5 years from now, current freshmen are graduating from college and the situation hasn't changed that much. I mean, one thing to note is that especially for a company the size of Google or Intel or Facebook, these larger companies, like they did a lot of their hiring already and they're not growing as quickly anymore. So even if, 10 or 15 or 20% of their new hires are from underrepresented backgrounds, that's actually not going to make a big dent in their overall workforces. And so, yeah, I mean, I think your point is very valid.
Sometimes I feel like some of the efforts that we hear from, the large corporations that are kind of trying to, at least on a public face, are trying to make changes, is that they're doing it. Sometimes it seems like they're doing it because it suits them in the public eye, and as we see here, they're not necessarily following through on it. That it makes them look better, but they aren't kind of hitting that end point, and that's definitely kind of a frustrating realization, I think, in this regard.
I mean, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, to see these graphs that I'm seeing on Apple, I just feel like that's a little gross. It feels like it's just marketing right there. There's no heart behind that. I was going to ask, what would you suggest for companies to sort of what would you suggest for them to do to be a little more heartfelt about this issue and not come off as so, kind of tone deaf?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that came up in many of my conversations. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm a journalist who's written about this topic, and so it's hard for me to make recommendations. But one thing that seemed clear to me in talking with a number of companies and employees and students is that there are always at these companies these diversity initiatives that are run by diversity heads of diversity chiefs, and there are people who work for them with job titles like diversity program manager, or that's often the title specifically. And these are the people who are going to historically Black colleges, who are focused on recruiting people from underrepresented backgrounds. But we're still at a point where a focus on diversity isn't a sort of company-wide initiative that's really ingrained in the culture at companies. And so it's a diversity recruiter can go to Howard or go to Stanford or MIT or whatever and recruit a number of Black or Latino or Native American or female candidates of whatever race to go work at these companies and bring them in for interviews and so on. But if the manager who's ultimately making the decision about who to hire for a job isn't clued into this whole diversity effort, all those initiatives are kind of the point is sort of lost. It's not clear to me that it helps much.
Oh, okay. Here's the thing, though. We're always going to get pushback from those people who, and I don't think they're wrong. We're going to say it would be nice to have diversity in the workplace. It would be nice to have cultural mixing happening in the halls of innovation. But anything that sounds like quota will automatically have pushback because they're going to say, wait a minute. Silicon Valley is a meritocracy. We'll hire the best person for the job. Right. We don't care what their ethnicity is. We don't care what their sex is. We don't care what their orientation is. Is that actually true, though?
Yeah,
is that real?
Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think executives at these companies can sometimes be under the misimpression that their current hiring and recruiting practices are the fairest, most meritocratic possible practices, right? And the problem is that's a false assumption. That's a false premise. So when companies say, we wish we could be more diverse, but we don't want to sacrifice merit, we don't want to sacrifice quality, that assumes that what they're doing now doesn't sacrifice those things, but it does, because it's been shown that a more diverse workforce is a better workforce. It's a higher quality workforce. So yeah, I mean, that's what I would say on that topic.
One thing, a term that I had not heard of before reading this, and it kind of stood out to me, and it's kind of like a snake eating its own tail in this sense, is this term around this thought around stereotype threat. How exactly, what is that, and how is it kind of impacting potential entrants at these positions?
Stereotype threat is a phenomenon in which people from underrepresented backgrounds are likelier than their underrepresented, their overrepresented counterparts to feel like they're sort of representing their race or representing their gender, and that if they make a mistake, it reflects poorly on their race and their gender, and that they're confirming stereotypes. And so what happens is, if I'm a Black female programmer who's graduating from college and interviewing for a job, and if I make a mistake in my interview, it might make me, and this is a generalization, obviously, but according to this theory, it might make me, more frazzled and likelier to sort of stumble over future questions than it might for someone else. And so, it's hard to call it, it's hard to say the interviewer was racist, but if an interviewer is not aware of something like stereotype threat, which is affecting somebody who's interviewing for a position, then, that could put that interviewee at a disadvantage.
Yeah, the conversation often has, diversity as part of it, but it's also about inclusion here. And that's a big part of what you're talking about just kind of Silicon Valley in general being more inclusive for people of, from all over, from all walks of life. And right now it just kind of seems like, there's one piece of the puzzle that's being worked on, but there's a bigger kind of picture issue with just decades of kind of history for a lot of
people that are in the valley. Just a small part of the puzzle is being put together. They're just working on the lake. They're not working on the entire scene with the bridge.
They're not putting their SimCity together entirely.
Yeah, exactly.
Too, because it's like if I'm a person of color being offered a job at one of these companies, and I see that there aren't already people like me working at this place, I'm just less likely to feel like it's a place where I belong.
Right, especially when everyone that you're around has interests that don't align with yours. You pointed that out in the article that, like I go out for drinks with my colleagues and they're talking about, shows that I don't watch and activities that I don't do. And that in and of itself is indicative of this kind of, just challenge for someone coming into a world, an entirely new world and new situation for them, and just feeling at the onset that you just don't align with your peers.
The worst comment I've ever heard in a workplace was someone telling me, well, you're representing your people. I'm like, wait, what?
Whoa.
I'm what? What am I doing now?
Right.
It's like, oh, okay, I didn't realize.
It's okay,
I was
I'm
doing...
representing women everywhere right now by being on.
If I mess up, it's okay not to hire anyone who looks like me from now on.
Wow. Yeah. That's not a good thing to say.